I mean, it's important not to underestimate the Islamic Republic of Iran. It's not a regime that is popular with its own people. And one of the things I pointed out yesterday, I think it's the elephant in the room. The Iranian regime doesn't have the support of the Iranian people for what it is doing in the region. What it's doing in terms of supporting these proxies and certainly its opposition against Israel's right to exist as a country, these are not policies that the regime has the backing of the Iranian people for. So the regime knows that. And I think that is going to be a big part of why they are hoping that their volley of missiles that they fired at Israel yesterday will not be met by major response from Israel. We have to wait and see. But that's the hope in Tehran, because they really do want to move on. Because I think fundamentally what the Iranian regime is banking on is this sort of long war against Israel, war of attrition. Have groups like Hamas and Hezbollah bleed the Israelis year in, year out, and Iran can sit away 500 miles away and just watch this show. Well, you've seen the Israelis are saying it's not going to happen. We're going to take the war to Iran, and that's why we have the tensions that we're seeing right now.
Well, I wonder your thoughts on that and what the next step should be. If Iran doesn't think it can afford a wider war with Israel, and if Israel has the superior military, why not go for it now? If you're Israel, why not attack Iran's nuclear program while you have the opportunity?
Joe, it's easier said than done. Iran learned over the last few decades in terms of how to build and how to spread out, if you will, its nuclear facility. It's not one side or two or three sides, multiple sides. Across the country, the size of Iran, just to give you an example, is 3 times the size of the country of France. So, you know, it's a major undertaking for Israel. I'm not sure if the Israelis militarily can do this on their own. And the big question is, will the United States go in and help them in such a mission? And to be honest, sitting here in Washington, following the debate, if you will, the United States clearly wants to help Israel in defending itself, but that's a very different matter than taking this country to a mission where you are taking out multiple, sites in Iran that could open a conflict that, as I said, I don't think this administration certainly is interested in.
Yeah, defense and offense are very different things, and that is important to point out here. As we consider, though, the idea that the U.S. would come to aid Israel, that you would see an alliance at work, knowing that in the attack Iran launched at Israel back in April, it was not just the U.S. that was helping defensively, but the U.K., Jordan was involved in that as well. I wonder what you think would realistically happen if we were to see more retaliation between Iran and Israel, if the U.S. were to get more materially involved. Who else is drawn in? Is anyone going to come to Iran's defense other than the proxies that it has been funding and have been materially weakened by the Israeli military's efforts over the last year?
So, Kaylee, I think that's exactly the right question to ask. And frankly, I think the answer to that is Iran, the Islamic Republic of Iran, I should say, is strategically alone. I would be very hard pressed to point out a country that I could say for sure will come and side with Iran in a war where Israel and Iran are fighting it out. The Russians are not going to come to Iran's aid, regardless of all the pleasantries that you hear Vladimir Putin and Ali Khamenei in Tehran exchange. The Chinese are not going to come to Iran's aid. The Arab world, by and large, is going to, at best, sit at the sidelines, watch this. And frankly, a lot of these Arab governments, particularly in the Gulf states, they're happy to see Israel destroy Hezbollah, Hamas, these non-state Arab militant actors. So the Iranians have a number of proxy groups that they can maybe rely upon. But look, the biggest of them all was Hezbollah, an entity Iran invested in for 42 years, hundreds of millions of dollars. And in the span of a few weeks, we've seen Israel destroy much of Hezbollah's capability. So this is not a moment for Iran to gamble and go into a conflict that militarily it really is, as I said, in a strategically lonely place and at a major disadvantage.
Is it a moment for Israel to make a major move against Iran without the blessing of the United States?
Look, that's obviously what Prime Minister Netanyahu is saying. He's even talking about helping the Iranian people help themselves from this Islamist regime. I don't know what the Israelis have in mind in terms of planning. If it's serious, that would be a game changer. That could be the outcome of the last year, where you say, if you're Israel, you say to the world, look, if you want sustained stability in the Middle East, there's only one way forward, which is either this Iranian regime entirely changes its regional agenda, pulls back in and focuses on Iranian national interest, or you go for the jugular, as I said, you go for regime change. I don't know what Israel will end up doing, but right now, obviously, they have multiple fronts. They're fighting Hamas, now increasingly in Lebanon. And who helps Israel in this mission? Again, that's another major question mark for me. So a lot of moving parts in all of this. But I just want to say finally on this issue of Iran, this fight that the Iranian regime has picked against Israel is really an ideological a project of a few men at the top of the echelons of power in Tehran. This is not Iran's fight. Whatever one thinks of the Arab-Israeli conflict, that's between the Palestinians and the Israelis. And Iran is just throwing stone at it. It's not helping. And what we've seen is Iranian actions and those of the proxies that are aligned with Iran is just destabilizing the region further.
Well, we've had many questions throughout the last year around leverage and influence, both in terms of the U.S. ability to exercise leverage over Israel, influence its own military decisions, whether it comes to conduct in Gaza or now in Lebanon, questions around Iran's ability to influence its own proxies. And there's also the question of how U.S. policy is able to influence Iranian behavior directly. We heard from President Biden today talking about the prospect of more sanctions. There are sanctions in place. Republicans, including Senator J.D. Vance on the debate stage last night, argued that they have been not enough, that it's been effectively appeasement of Iran. Will sanctions, further sanctions, make a difference in behavior here, do you believe?
To be honest, I don't think more sanctions alone is going to cut it anymore. I mean, Iran today is the second most sanctioned country on earth after the Russian Federation, over 5,000 sanctions. And Iran's been under one sanction or another since 1983 when the State Department put them on the terrorism list, sponsor of terrorism for the first time. So a long time. There's a whole industry in Iran where basically people are engaged in cutting around sanctions, and there are like-minded countries out there that share this sort of anti-Americanism that the Islamic Republic has, most notably Russia, China, North Koreas of this world. They get together, they go around the sanctions. And the tragedy in all of this for the Iranian people is, while the regime can, go around sanctions and survive for another day, this is costing the Iranian nation hundreds of billions of dollars each year in lost economic potential. Because guess what? Nobody's going to invest in Iran, which should be one of the largest economies, certainly in the Middle East, if not beyond that. So this is an Iranian regime that has chosen a foreign policy that really is costing the Iranian nation dearly. And if you're sitting in Washington, whether you're President Biden, whether you're President Trump, you have an Iranian counterpart that really seriously doesn't want to cut deals, I would argue. And I know a lot of people will push back and say, well, they signed a nuclear deal in 2015. It was the American side that walked away. That's one side of the story. The reality is you cannot have an Iran that signs nuclear deals or other agreements with the U.S. on certain issues while it wants to kick the United States and Israel out of the Middle East. They just don't go hand in hand. If you want to be normal, you have to be 100% normal. You can't be 50% normal. And that's the challenge for the Iranian regime right now and the path they have to choose going forward.
Well, the timing is not lost on us here, Alex. The fact that this attack took place on the eve of the start of the Jewish high holy days. What is going to transpire with that in mind in the next 10 days as Iran looks at the calendar?
Look, Joe, I got to think that this Iranian regime is not that confident, that they were really in a bad place. I don't think they wanted to do what they did yesterday with those, firing those missiles. I think they want to stay to the game plan, which is the long war against Israel, have the proxies, throw whatever their proxies can throw at Israel over a long period of time, bleed Israel. To the extent that what the Iranian regime media will call reverse Jewish migration, that people that over the last few decades and so on moved to Israel decide, this place isn't safe enough, I'm going back. That is the Iranian wishful thing that's going on here. But the killing of Hassan Nasrallah really put him in an awkward position. It was the moment where emperor has no clothes on. And this was the man that they had handpicked, cultivated for years. Suddenly he was gone. And everybody in the region, among the proxies of Iran that Iran is working with, were looking for Iran to do something. And for Iran not to have done anything would have been, in many ways, the end of them as a leader of the axis of resistance. And that's what I think they did, but they're still hoping that this big Israeli retaliation that some Israeli reports are suggesting is coming is not going to come, because that might give Iran a way out of this too. They cannot afford, as I said before, they're strategically alone in this.